Story 1. My cousin's wife fabricated a story of having an affair with my sister's husband while they were experiencing difficulties in their marriage. She has cheated on my cousin at least twice. Additionally, she physically assaulted a cancer patient at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She was fired, but the charges were dropped because the patient died before he could testify in court. Story 2. I dated a man who, along with his two brothers, tortured and murdered a woman and then tried to hide her body. It turned out the one I dated was the actual killer. I really can pick them. Story 3. I would have said my dad for being a violent alcoholic, but it goes to the person who married my best friend. He paid a contract killer to murder his then-wife while he was overseas for an alibi, so he could get the house and kids. Luckily, he hired an undercover police officer, but he did not serve anywhere near the time in jail he should have. Story 4. I went to middle and high school with a guy who was an easy target for bullying due to his weight, poor hygiene, and social skills. He posted a lot on YouTube and made smash or pass videos featuring female classmates when he was 13 to 14 years old. By high school, there were many rumors about him having inappropriate images on his Discord account, specifically images of children. Most people spread these rumors because he gave off that vibe, making it an easy insult. As the year progressed, he started attending school less frequently. He posted a vague threat on Snapchat about doing something he would regret. Most thought it hinted at a school shooting, but it was more likely a suicidal threat. Last summer, about a year after graduation, I searched my town on Google and checked the news tab to see what unusual events had occurred recently. I came across the headline, "Teenager arrested on child pornography charges." Sure enough, it was him. 7,000 files. He had nude images of a 16-year-old and had purchased nude images from a 13-year-old. He also possessed videos of girls as young as 7. He was released on a bond known as promise to appear, as far as I know. His sentencing is this month. I never spoke to him much. He did once call me attractive in an Instagram story alongside a picture of the Flash, for some reason. The thought that I walked the same halls as this guy for about 7 years is just strange. Edit. I just remembered some additional information. His last post on Instagram featured a picture of his face with the caption, "I'm sorry for what I have done," a few months before his arrest. This incident occurred in Connecticut. He was 19 years old. He was very involved in the Boy Scouts, which means he was around children. However, to my knowledge, there are no reports of him assaulting any children. Story 5. My former boss often stated, "I'm quick to hire and quick to fire," and made a point to single out someone from the 20-person team at least once a day in front of everyone, using that phrase. During our one-on-one meetings, he would look at me and say, "Name, I'm going to be extremely harsh right now," with a beet red face and a quivering bottom lip. He would then proceed to yell for an hour while people outside the room looked in with fear. His behavior was disastrous. Even worse, he was already wealthy beyond anyone's imagination but felt the need to run our startup through fear and intimidation. Story 6. My dad knew a man with mental disabilities who sometimes did odd jobs at our house. My dad owned a market stall, and one day this man was sitting on the steps, sobbing because he had found out he was dying of cancer and didn't have long to live. Two brothers who owned a nearby stall were watching and laughing because they thought it was funny. Story 7. My mother-in-law burned her house down because she did not like it. She collected the insurance money and built a brand new one. I was supposed to rebuild it, but she did not agree to my terms and conditions as a contractor, which required 25% upfront to cover the cost of materials. When my wife passed away from cancer, she went to the funeral home, took the urn with her ashes, and never gave me any. Story 8. A kid I grew up with. When I think back, I can confidently say he was a psychopath. He would take small lizards and spike them on cacti. He also enjoyed putting them in matchboxes and placing them on the road, waiting for a car to run over them. Once, I heard him tell a girl walking with her brother, who had Down syndrome, "You know that your brother won't live as long as you?" Once, he was standing and throwing rocks at a bird's nest, saying, "Wouldn't it be funny if the mom returned to find all her baby eggs smashed?" The list of things he did is extensive. My mom was friends with his mom, and they lived next door, so I unfortunately witnessed a lot of his cruelty. I asked my mom what happened to him about 20 years after we moved away, and she said, "Yeah, he is in prison now." All I could think was, good. Story 9. The man who tried to blackmail me with false information scared me so much that I caved and gave him money. That was foolish because as soon as I got home, he tried again. I said no this time, and he told me I was worthless and that the world would be better off without me, and that I should end my life. Being in a very bad mental state, I agreed with him and attempted to take my own life. If I hadn't had a last-second change of heart, I probably wouldn't be here. But I am here. Apparently, according to others, he's in deep trouble with the law and has essentially been blacklisted from every job in his industry. How the tables have turned. Story 10. My ex's father locked his mother in the basement, and when the police arrived, he held her at gunpoint. Later in life, he was caught trying to solicit sex from an undercover officer. When I lived with him, if I didn't do my dishes right away, he would put them on our bed filled with water. The same applied to laundry that was washed but not dried. He is a hoarder, and the entire house is filthy. I was with my ex for 4 years. I was 18 and he was 32. Please, if anyone young is reading this right now, listen closely. You are not mature for your age. You are being groomed. You might be legally an adult, but there's a reason why they are not dating someone their own age. They are a creep. I am now 33 and can never picture myself dating someone who is 14 years younger than me. It is revolting. To those who prey on individuals who are barely legal, you are repulsive. Story 11. I used to chat with this guy. He seemed relaxed and we liked a lot of the same things. It was pretty easy to get along with him. One day, I found out he had been arrested for brutally murdering his partner, who had given everything to him. I believe he takes the cake for me. I hope everyone else is having a wonderful time in prison at his expense. Story 12. A woman named Candace, whom I used to work with, smothered her daughter the night before her estranged husband was scheduled to take her to Disney World. Candace then attempted to take her own life but was unsuccessful. Story 13. When I worked in a crime victim agency, I had to interview a convicted sex offender who, 30 years after his crimes against young boys, was determined to secure another job in a child-related role through his contacts, while completely blaming his victims for leading him on. Very few people have ever made me uncomfortable, but he disturbed me the most. Story 14. Malignant narcissist ex-girlfriend. She was truly terrible when crossed. She aimed to ruin lives. Story 15. My aunt, a strong supporter of the Make America Great Again movement, despises gay and transgender individuals. She left a dog in the desert and drove away, and she reported an employee at Starbucks for wearing a gay pride pin. Additionally, she identifies as a Christian. Story 16. My sister-in-law abandoned her daughter at age 7 when the girl reported her new boyfriend possibly molesting her. It has been about 5 years since then. The boyfriend left her, and now she has a new child. My sister-in-law still hasn't attempted to rekindle her relationship with my niece. She is out there living her best life. Story 17. I never met her, but in my book, she's a young woman my son dated for a couple of months. Long story short, he told her he didn't want to see her anymore. She begged him not to end the relationship, but he was firm in his decision. Out of spite, she lied and filed a domestic violence report with the police. As a result, he lost a great job, his dream job. Story 18. My colleague was stopped by the police during a routine traffic stop due to suspicious driving behavior. He failed a breathalyzer test and another test at the police station. They processed him as usual, including taking his DNA. A couple of weeks later, the police national computer registered a DNA match related to a cold case. He had violently abducted and raped a student 20 years earlier, presumably while intoxicated. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to serve 15 years at Her Majesty's pleasure. The workplace kept the matter quiet until it was reported on the front page of the local newspaper. Then everyone realized why he had been on leave for 9 months. Story 19. I went to Jim Jones Church in San Francisco with my neighbor who was a member when I was 13 years old. She made me go up to the altar so he could save me. He placed his hands on my shoulders, stared at me, and asked if I believed. I was quite frightened. I nodded yes, and he moved on to the next person. I will never forget his eyes. They were unsettling. This was about a year before the Jonestown Massacre. Story 20. When I waited tables, I worked with a man who had served time for a serious crime. At that time, I slept on a couch in the living room. There were sliding doors that opened to a ground floor patio, and they were never locked. One night, I woke up to him asking for $20. As a server, I had the money, but I refused. A few months later, he murdered his fiancée. You never know about some people, but with him, you definitely did. Story 21. I used to work with a person from Serbia. He was once talking about his time in the military in the early 1990s. Story 22. I worked with someone for a short time who expressed genuine interest in harming someone during a disaster, specifically around the time of the San Francisco earthquake, suggesting that one could get away with it. I changed my shift that night. He definitely looked the part. Story 23. A guy I used to sit next to in math tried to murder his girlfriend with a brick. Miraculously, she survived. He was always an odd person. Story 24. When I was in college working at the campus center information desk for my work-study job, Gordon Liddy asked me where the bathroom was. Story 25. That is uncertain. I have encountered too many abusive individuals. Choose any of them. If you harm children through violence or sexual actions, you are evil and deserve punishment. Story 26. Someone I used to work with was, without question, a sociopath. He was the office bully, though no action was ever taken to address his behavior. He kept a punching bag hanging from his office ceiling and used it during business hours. Story 27. It was definitely my nurse when I spent a week in the intensive care unit. She told me rude and vulgar things while I was extremely sick. She did not have a conscience at all. Story 28. My partner's family asked me to help retrieve a family member who drove their car into a ditch on the side of the road. The family member was okay, but I learned they crashed because they were driving under the influence. Apparently, this was the 6th time they had done this. They have engaged in many other destructive behaviors, sometimes involving alcohol and sometimes not. For example, they keep buying pets they do not care for. Their large dogs will harm their smaller pets, and they will just buy more pets to replace those that have been harmed. They are the only person I have met whom I am certain is a psychopath. Story 29. When I was 18 and in culinary school, I made friends with a large guy we will call John. John was a bit unconventional but nice enough. There was nothing concerning about him. We both enjoyed movies, and we worked well together as decent friends. One day, he didn't show up to school. Weeks later, our class found out that he had been arrested along with his brother for an armed standoff with the police while attempting to hide computers containing child pornography. I was horrified. Story 30. John Stevenson, my former boss and general manager, was a psychopath. The small company I worked for first learned of his crimes against his 4 sons from the front page of the local newspaper detailing his arrest. He had brought his youngest son to an emergency room with a badly broken arm. The son, when questioned by doctors, stated that his father had intentionally broken his arm with a baseball bat, as he had been doing for years with all of his sons. Alarmed, the doctor checked the medical records of all 4 boys and confirmed the truth. Each son had been treated multiple times for broken arms. After his arrest, the company still allowed him to work, undoubtedly because he was the general manager who reported directly to the owner, an immigrant from India. It was disturbing to work for someone whose child abuse was on the front page of the newspaper for over a week. He apparently had good lawyers, pleaded guilty to child endangerment, and was heavily fined and put on probation with the stipulation that he have no contact with his sons until they turned 18, facing a 20-year sentence for any violation of that order. He left the company a few months after his conviction. He had been raised in a military boarding school his entire life, a fact he frequently boasted about. Ironically, his wife was serving life in prison for brutally beating a coworker with a lead pipe at a different company, which nearly killed the coworker and left her crippled for life. What a nightmare life must have been for those 4 boys, with both parents being genuine psychopaths. Story 31. My adoptive grandparents, mainly my grandma, would lock me in my room and sometimes starve me for up to a week. This usually lasted 3 to 4 days. It started when I was 8 and ended when I was 14, when I was sent to a boys' ranch. He married my adoptive grandma when I was 7, and that is when everything began. These are challenging times, and I am still healing, but I will keep moving forward. Story 32. A man was in jail and was transferred to maximum security for committing sexual offenses against multiple young girls. I hope he did not complete his sentence. Story 33. I think his name was Daniel. He had a mohawk and dressed as a punk. It turned out he was a neo-Nazi. He was a former school friend who called me a traitor for dating a black girl. Story 34. My mom's grandfather was a child molester who never faced punishment and had a second family, possibly even a third. I was never supposed to meet him, but my aunt went behind my mom's back. The second most harmful person might be that aunt, who excuses any behavior as long as it is done by a man, specifically any man who claims to be Christian. Story 35. I attended school and shared a desk and lab with Chris Dorner. He went on to murder 4 people before taking his own life. He was targeting police officers and their family members. Story 36. Idi Amin and I were roommates back in college. He is the only one that comes to mind, except maybe for Pol Pot, who was in my cabin one summer at church camp. Story 37. I lived with a man in a boarding house who was accused of killing a woman and decapitating her. Charges were eventually dropped, but he was the only person I met for the first time, and I felt an instant chill. It was a bad situation. Story 38. Oh wow, that would be my mentor, or better, my former mentor. He taught me about life and wisdom and helped me through problem solving in school. I really loved him like the father I never had, until he decided I needed to face my fears, including the fear of being sad. It was so unsettling. He also wanted me to harm others. That's when I realized he had been using me all along. I was between 12 and 14 at the time, and I was literally terrified of leaving him for a few months because I feared he might harm me. I'm an adult now and I'm just fine. Thank God I never saw him again. Story 39. I did not meet him, but I was in the same room. I was called for jury duty and participated in the interview process, which took place in a full courtroom with the defendant present. I said a few things that disqualified me, but I also made some jokes that elicited laughter from the people present and the defendant. When I got home, I looked up the man online. He had shot his wife in the back and killed her in front of their 2 children. I still think about him chuckling at a silly joke I made and what lay behind that expression. Story 40. I had a meeting with the warden of a men's high-security prison in Texas, and I was pretty certain that he embodied evil. From my understanding, he was appointed to his position directly by the governor and had absolutely no credentials to his name, not even an associate's or a bachelor's degree. He was from Louisiana and played deep woods Cajun music all the time. He spoke as if he were an elected judge delivering verdicts and sentences over mundane matters with his staff, and had 3 habeas corpus suits against him that the Texas Supreme Court dismissed outright. He was morbidly obese and appeared to be an avid alcoholic. As far as evil goes, he is definitely on the list. Additionally, I have encountered evil when dealing with the spouses of military personnel in particular. They are subsidized in every sense of the word and enjoy the benefits of selected socialism, but are the first to deny those benefits to others while continually having children and inflicting psychological damage on anyone they can. I had to work closely with one person. Her licensure was paid for entirely by the military, for a few months, and by the end of it, she was sending me pictures of various kinds and trying to get intimate. To be honest, she was quite convincing. I have many stories like this to share. Story 41. The most negative person in terms of her actions towards me was definitely the last person I worked for. I am trying to move past the hatred, but she significantly impacted my life. Story 42. While I was in China over 20 years ago, I met a South African gold mine security guard who, when drunk, could not stop bragging about how he shot someone almost every day. Story 43. My mom. I caught her mistreating my first wife while she was in palliative care at my house. After she passed, my mom said to me, "Thank God she is dead." As if it were no big deal to her. I have since found out she has said similar things about other people after their deaths. Story 44. I once met Elon Musk at a technology event. This was before he changed significantly. Does that count? Story 45. In my last 2 years before retirement, I worked with a person who took a dislike to me. It was a long 2 years, and I couldn't figure out why she felt this way. At one point, I thought I was going crazy. 8 months after I retired, after months of nightmares, I realized that I had been manipulated. Story 46. Honestly, my father put my family through hell. When I was born, my dad was 18 and dating my then 19-year-old mother. He threatened to take me and my mother away from my grandparents and never let us see them again. He was an alcoholic and later became addicted to meth. We had to sell our house and my mother separated from him. He left us with a significant amount of debt. He went to treatment and she took him back. He is a master manipulator and quite harmful as a person. I haven't spoken to him or to my mother, who is completely influenced by him, in over 6 years. My sister is also struggling because of him, and I don't talk to her either. My family life is profoundly affected by his actions. Story 47. I taught English to Ignacio de Chaos while living in Belfast for a brief period in 2009. He was a friendly individual. When someone discovered his history and began complaining about his presence in school, another person remarked that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Story 48. My ex was abusive to women and children and a pathological liar. There is no low he would not go to. He taught me that true evil exists and that there are genuinely insidious people out there. Story 49. A kid I was in high school with and shared a couple of classes with turned out a few years after we graduated that he had been abusing his younger sisters for years, and definitely had been when I knew him. At that time, it came out that the oldest of the two was in 7th grade and the other was still in elementary school. I used to trade comic books and collectible cards with this kid. He always seemed a little strange, but not in a harmful way, like one of those people who always feels sticky and smells a body odor even if they just got out of the shower. That was really disturbing. Story 50. My best friend from middle school's mother had strict rules. Among the highlights, my friend could not go outside until her room was clean. Normally, this was no big deal, but cleaning meant that all clothes had to be precisely placed in the closet and shoes had to be perfectly aligned. Nothing was allowed on the floor, and there could not be any specks of dust. Her mother met one of my friend's potential dates at the door when he came to pick her up. She refused to let the date happen because he was poor. The mother drove her husband to steal from the bank where he worked. As a result, no one was allowed in the study, where they ran the scheme successfully for years. The father eventually turned himself in because he didn't want to continue with it anymore. When the husband faced charges, the wife divorced him to avoid full restitution. It is unclear how she managed that. She then disrupted a marriage to obtain money from her new partner, among other things. Story 51. My mother is a covert narcissist. She exists to bring others down, and the harm she causes is exponentially more dangerous because it's always plausibly deniable. Story 52. My aunt molested my dad for years when they were kids, almost killed him as a teenager, and is a pathological liar. She has made multiple disturbing comments about children, including me, stole my dad's identity, and once vandalized our bathroom during Christmas. She has multiple sclerosis, which is affecting her brain, and now has the decision-making capacity of a 4 to 6-year-old child. I dislike her greatly. Her abuse triggered my dad's depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, which led him to start drinking at 12 years old to cope. He took his own life a little under 2 years ago after years of battling alcoholism. I do not care that she is disabled. She is genuinely evil, and I am relieved that once my grandparents pass away, I will never have to see her again. If it were up to me, she would be placed in the most affordable nursing home available. Story 53. I used to date a firefighter. I witnessed him commit insurance fraud, and he directly admitted to burning down his house with his ex-wife, who was also a firefighter, to cash in on it before I met him. He conveniently had another house fire a week after I signed over the insurance for the house I had with him. Thankfully, I told the insurance company everything I knew beforehand. As time went by, I noticed he laughs at cynical and evil things and genuinely doesn't reciprocate emotion unless given clear directions on how to do so. The man literally thought that a chemically induced miscarriage wasn't a big deal, despite me being violently ill. He just went to work and didn't acknowledge it at all. The frightening part is he is still a firefighter in Niagara Falls and Waynfleet. He actually got promoted to captain after he and his ex-wife burned their house down. I feel so sorry for the woman who thinks he's a catch. I'm very concerned for her. Story 54. I worked for a man who was caught with nearly 1,000 images and videos featuring children, some as young as a few months old. While I was there, he also tampered with my drink. If the woman I was working with hadn't told me she felt something was off after the drink made us both feel strange after one sip, I get sick thinking about what could have happened to me. He is a disgusting human being, and he deserves every day he spends in prison for the rest of his life. Please only read this article if you can keep yourself safe from being triggered by disturbing information about what was found when he was arrested. Story 55. I guess he wasn't evil yet, but I've met a serial killer. Unfortunately, I was a child at the time, and he and his family seemed normal, wife and kid, family friends of ours. He and his wife split because he came out to his family as gay and then moved on. I hadn't heard from or about him in decades. One day, in 2018, my mom called me asking if I had heard about the serial killer on the news. I said yes. It's crazy. She asked if I recognized his name, and everything hit me like a ton of bricks all at once. I had watched a documentary about him, and it still feels wild to me that this guy was in my circle in any way. Story 56. I would say the person who broke into my apartment and assaulted me with a weapon was probably my dad. I found my dad's Reddit account one time by looking at his laptop screen. I went in to look at his profile, and his comments were terrible. He was active in several men's rights subreddits, pretending to be a woman, using a combination of my name and my sister's name as his username. He was saying awful things about women, even though he has daughters. I already had a difficult relationship with him before, but after that, I felt as though he was dead to me. Story 57. When I was about 17, we won a national debate competition among high schools in the UK. I got to participate in a debate with the current party leaders and had the honor of shaking hands with Margaret Thatcher. Story 58. I went to high school with a guy who assaulted a minor over winter break during my junior year. He was the awkwardly social type with a few friends, but I was closer with his older brother. I never talked to him after everything that happened. Story 59. A friend from Canada I knew on IMDb started behaving erratically after going off his medication. He would express a lot of troubling and offensive views, including homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny. When I eventually blocked him, he attempted to create fake accounts on various social media platforms to stalk me. I haven't heard from him in some time, but I feel like we may eventually confront each other like Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. Story 60. I don't want to get doxxed or sued for slander, but there is a man in my town who is part of the Old Boys Club. Many well-off men belong to this group, but anyway, his name is Steve. He is a slumlord, charging over $1,000 for a 15-square-foot space in a building that is crumbling into the creek below and is infested with black mold. He is known for entering the rooms of his tenants and committing harmful acts against women and children. He is also a prominent member of the local school board, which will now be consolidating the local schools based on grade and age. If you want to see evil people, look at Alaska. Story 61. I am truly embarrassed that I have a current tie for two people who are very much in the news. Story 62. As a criminal defense lawyer, I often say that if you want to know about my violent sex offender client, who had an extensive criminal record and was in court for attacking a prison guard with bodily waste, I have to ask which one. Story 63. My parents and step-parents, along with some of my exes and former friends, make it difficult to choose. However, if I had to decide, I would say my parents for having me when they clearly didn't want a child to raise. Story 64. When I was in high school, the local fairground was a campaign stop for both state and national level politicians. Local honor students had the opportunity to shake hands with the Republican candidates after their speeches. I was introduced to President Reagan in 1984 during the AIDS crisis. Story 65. My mother's half-sister allowed 2 children in the family, including her daughter, to be sexually abused by her husband and did nothing about it throughout her daughter's childhood. Her husband was wealthy and well-connected in their small community. Coming from a poor family, she was not willing to give up the luxuries that came with being married into his family. She continues to shame both victims to this day. Story 66. One of my former friend's old roommates became a serial killer, specifically targeting homeless Indigenous women in Winnipeg. He dismembered their bodies and discarded them in the landfill. I believe he killed 4, possibly 5 women. It's disturbing to think that I shared drinks and conversations in the same room with him. Story 67. A relative of mine, who was known for being charming and charismatic, eventually went to prison for over a decade for the rape and sexual assault of multiple women. My mother tried to convince me that it was the women who were out to get him, claiming they had consensual relationships with him and later changed their minds to get him into trouble. I somewhat believed her because I was young at the time. It was only when I got older that I discovered some of the women he assaulted were in their early teens, while he was a married adult with children. There were adult women as well, but finding out about the teenagers made me realize how false what I had been told truly was. Story 68. My grandmother was a difficult person in my life. I found out about her influence when I was 20. She had a complicated relationship with my father, and I already had negative feelings toward her. She attempted to take my mother's baby, which was me when I was 10 years old, to her church. At that time, my mother and her best friend were planning to go to Germany to have fun. We were moving to Georgia and thought they would appreciate my company. My grandfather was extremely angry, and I am unsure what he said to her, but she left in tears. She was a troublesome person, and I would never allow her near my husband and daughters. I hope she faces the consequences of her actions. Story 69. I met people who used to be in Republika Srpska, the individuals who inspired the "my dad is a war criminal" meme. I am uncertain whether they were involved in anything, but considering how they defended Srebrenica, I have my doubts. Story 70. Once I was a sex worker, and a man had been going around the massage parlors in town, beating women and stealing their money. Everywhere had a description of him. He came into where I was working, and I got to sit while we waited for a sex worker to be available for him. Though really, we had called the police. As we sat there, he drew a little diagram of a stick figure man peeing on a woman. It was creepy. The police showed up, took him outside, and arrested him. I will never forget that picture. Story 71. Without a doubt, the most malevolent person I have encountered, unfortunately on multiple occasions, was Gwen Shamblin. She was the founder of the Remnant Fellowship Church, which, if you are unfamiliar, is a cult located in Brentwood, Tennessee. There is also a well-made miniseries about it called The Way Down that showcases her true character. Story 72. My father, an abusive alcoholic, became extremely intoxicated one night and attempted to harm my family. He had other mental health issues that were evident. He received no jail time because his family supported him, claiming he only broke down a door and physically assaulted us. It was much more than that. Story 73. I have met Trump. I had an interaction with him for about 4 minutes. I can confirm that he has the eyes of a trapped and dangerous shark. Story 74. My mother-in-law is deceased now, but she would manipulate my husband and me against each other, often criticizing how we spent money and accusing us of hiding it. She would not eat a dinner I cooked because I didn't follow the recipe she preferred. At the dinner table, while everyone served their plates, she would say she couldn't eat anything because her doctor advised her not to. Once, while I was 9 months pregnant, she told me she was going to give the baby swimming lessons at 6 weeks old. I responded that we didn't have a pool, and she said she would put a pool in her backyard and throw the baby in herself. I walked out. There are many more stories, but you get the point. Story 75. My girlfriend was a horrible person who took me for granted. She was verbally and emotionally abusive when all I wanted was love. I wasted this past year, crying every single week for a year straight. Story 76. I'm not sure if I am allowed to share links to Twitter on this platform, but some Canadians and Americans have called for violence against all civilians in Gaza. Story 77. I met Hillary Clinton in Scranton when she was campaigning. She seemed tired or overworked. But those eyes, those empty eyes, had no soul in them. Story 78. A heroin addict I went to high school with more than 50 years ago found Jesus, and now all the people he meets love him. Story 79. My brother-in-law. It's a long story, but I wish I could have had a say in where to place his ashes because I would have discarded them in a septic tank. Story 80. There was a person who manipulated others for fun, spreading lies, turning friends against each other, and never feeling any guilt. Truly toxic. Story 81. I don't think I've met anyone truly evil. I think I've definitely met some bad people, but I wouldn't call them evil. I would reserve the term evil for someone who is absolutely psychotic or completely out of their mind, so I consider it to be a bit of an extreme. Story 82. Someone obtained the password to my Microsoft account while I was in a party chat with him. He tried to make me pay $50, saying, "I know you have money," looking at this purchase history, which was really standard and reflected a paycheck-to-paycheck living situation. Anyway, he said if I didn't pay, he would wipe the account. Not being completely gullible, I hoped he would give me more time to get him his money, valuable time that the support team used to lock him out of my account forever. You can usually count on dishonest people having arrogance or being lazy. Story 83. I once met Donald Trump while working a temporary job as a server at a golf course during his first presidential campaign. You know what? He was quiet and friendly with the people around him, kind to the staff, and waved to the servers. Honestly, he was a pleasant person to be around. Is he petty, vindictive, and politically authoritarian? You bet. Is he directly responsible for the reshaping of Western alliances in the coming years? Probably. But you can't deny that he is charming to spend time with, which is likely how he gets away with so much behind closed doors. Story 84. My ex-best friend's girlfriend had threatened to kill me multiple times and admitted to killing cats and rabbits. She had pictures of them, and it wasn't hunting. She tortured them. She also sexually assaulted my ex-best friend multiple times and spread many rumors about me. To clarify, I'm a man, so this wasn't about jealousy over another girl, though that wouldn't justify her actions. The police were involved. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.